Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to trace one of the most astonishing roller coaster political thrillers of the entire 19th century. Seriously, we're looking at a man whose life reads a lot less like standard history and way more like a wildly implausible adventure novel. We're talking about Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, later known to the world as Napoleon III. And the big question we have to ask ourselves today is how exactly did a man who was widely considered a complete political laughingstock, a guy literally locked away in a fortress for treason, rise from total ruin to become a dominant, world-shaping leader just a few short years later? It's a crazy story. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the exiled Bonaparte heir. To really understand his bizarre destiny, we have to start right in the towering shadow of his famous uncle. He was born at the absolute glittering height of the First French Empire in 1808, but his early life was entirely upended by 1815. When his uncle was defeated at Waterloo, the whole Bonaparte family was suddenly forced out of France. He was raised in exile in Switzerland, which, funnily enough, actually gave him a lifelong, noticeable German accent. But he wasn't content to just sit quietly on the sidelines. As a young man, he threw himself into secret revolutionary societies in Italy, fighting as this sort of romantic revolutionary. Then, by 1832, following the deaths of other family members, he suddenly found himself as the de facto heir to the Bonaparte dynasty. Okay, moving right along to Section 2, failed coups and prison breaks. Honestly, his early political career played out like a stubborn, somewhat hilarious farce. He was completely convinced that the French people were just desperate for a Bonaparte to return, so he launched two totally botched, almost theatrical invasions of France. First, in 1836, he shows up in Strasbourg in an artillery uniform, hoping the military would rally behind him. Spoiler alert, they didn't. He was quickly surrounded and exiled. But he was undeterred. In 1840, he hired a boat and about 60 armed men to invade Boulogne. It was an absolute disaster. They were pretty much immediately stopped on the beach by local customs agents. The French press mercilessly mocked these attempts. Just listen to this quote from the newspaper Le Journal des Débats at the time. "This surpasses comedy. One does not kill madmen. One locks them up." And, well, lock him up they did. He was sentenced to life in prison at the bleak fortress of Ham in northern France. But rather than despair, he actually treated his confinement as an educational opportunity. He later proudly referred to the prison as his university. While locked away in his fortress room, he didn't just sit there and brood over his failures. He actively studied political economics. He even wrote and published a hugely popular pamphlet called The Extinction of Pauperism. In it, he strongly advocated for the working class, proposing banking systems to provide them credit and the establishment of agricultural colonies. It was a massive hit all across France and quietly but significantly laid the crucial groundwork for his future political rise. But let's be real, he wasn't going to wait around in a cell forever. After 6 years in prison, in 1846, he decided he'd had enough. Get this. When repairs started on his prison block, he simply disguised himself in the dirty work clothes of a laborer named Badinguet, hoisted a massive lumber plank onto his shoulder to hide his face, and literally walked right out the front gate to freedom. He eventually caught a boat to England, totally scot-free. Which brings us to Section 3, the Democratic landslide. Just 2 years after his incredibly dramatic escape, history handed him the ultimate opportunity. The 1848 revolution overthrew the French monarchy, and he rushed right back to Paris to run in the nation's first ever direct presidential election. His campaign was a fascinating paradox. To his political opponents, he was easily dismissed. They ridiculed him as a terrible, monotone public speaker, mocking him as a turkey who believes he's an eagle. But his platform was incredibly shrewd. He masterfully united completely opposing factions of the country. He offered poverty relief and worker rights to the left wing while simultaneously promising strict social order, family values, and religious protection to the conservatives. The result? A jaw-dropping democratic mandate. By appealing to rural peasants, unemployed urban workers, and conservative intellectuals all at the exact same time, he completely crushed his opponents. He walked away with over 5.5 million votes. That is nearly 3/4 of the entire national vote. He left the establishment candidates absolutely stunned. Moving into Section 4, seizing absolute power. So, the New Republic's constitution only allowed the president a single, non-renewable 4-year term. And when politicians flat out refused his attempts to amend the Constitution so he could run again, he took extreme extra-legal matters into his own hands. Now, we must look impartially at the shocking contradictions of his self-coup in December 1851. It's a very mixed bag. On one hand, he acted as a fierce authoritarian. His military occupied Paris, he had political opponents arrested in their beds, violently crushed street uprisings, leaving hundreds dead, and he enacted strict press censorship. Yet on the flip side, he dissolved a deeply unpopular assembly and instantly restored the universal voting rights that those very same politicians had previously stripped away from millions of working-class citizens. To legitimize his violent seizure of power, he immediately held a national plebiscite, a public vote. And although his critics deeply questioned the fairness and legality of voting under martial law, he secured an overwhelming yes vote from the public, with over 7.4 million citizens approving his actions. In his mind, this gave him the absolute ultimate democratic mandate to rule exactly as he saw fit. Exactly 1 year after the coup, following another wildly successful public referendum, the Second Republic was officially declared dead. The Second French Empire was born, and the man who was once the laughingstock of Europe ascended the throne as Napoleon III, absolute emperor of the French. Finally, let's dive into Section 5, Building the Modern Empire. Now in absolute control, the emperor firmly believed the government simply had to be the benevolent motor of the entire social and economic organism. Now, you can imagine the rest of Europe was terrified that a new Napoleon meant a return to continent-spanning wars. But he quickly reassured them, stating, "Some people say the empire is war, I say the empire is peace." He declared his conquests would be strictly internal, focusing on expanding the economy, modernizing infrastructure, and really making France an industrial powerhouse. And to be fair, he absolutely delivered on that promise. Through newly created state-backed investment banks, he multiplied the French railway network from a meager 3,500 kilometers to a massive 20,000 kilometers. He pushed for global infrastructure, famously backing the monumental construction of the Suez Canal. And perhaps what he's most visible for today, he initiated the total, sweeping reconstruction of Paris by George Eugene Haussmann. They literally bulldozed medieval slums to create the iconic city of grand sweeping boulevards that we all know and love today. His economic transformation was simply staggering. His agricultural reforms drained swamps, expanded farmland, and effectively ended famines in France. He built the second largest maritime shipping fleet in the world. He even oversaw a massive retail revolution, heavily supporting the creation of the world's very first glass and iron department stores, like Beaumarchais, which completely changed how people shopped forever. But like a lot of rapid rises, the fall was just as swift. His spectacular 22-year reign collapsed basically overnight in 1870, when he reluctantly went to war with the rising Prussia and was personally captured right on the battlefield at Sedan. He was deposed, and he died in exile in England. Yet, despite his catastrophic political end, his impact on the modern aesthetic, the banking system, and the physical landscape of France remains absolutely undeniable. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on based on the facts we've just covered. Was Napoleon III a brilliant, visionary architect of the modern world who knew exactly what his country needed to thrive? Or was he merely a ruthless populist dictator who killed a fragile democracy just to satisfy his own personal glory? It's a fascinating, complex puzzle, and I'll let you be the judge. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.